Welcome to the podcast that puts a finger on the pulse of revenue and technology. On this show, you'll hear from industry experts, executives, and investors on the art of transforming B2B businesses into scale-up insurgents. This is Revenue Uncoded.
So on today's podcast for Revenue Uncoded.
Uncoded.
Everyone introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Brian Preston.
I'm Bill Griffin.
I'm Barbara Lancaster.
And welcome to This Week in Billing. And
Sounded
Revenue
very much
Uncoded.
like 60 Minutes.
I know,
intro.
that's what I was going for God's sakes. You know, it's a Friday. I'm working hard at this.
It is.
So that's the perfect thing. So today's topic's 100 billing systems.
Oh, I've heard even more.
Even
I've heard
more.
even higher number than that.
So-
At the same company, no less.
Oh my gosh. So this is one of the challenges of billing and your revenue is what happens when you have 100 or a massive amount of billing systems and you need to manage your revenue.
At least, multiple is more than one.
Right,
Right?
fair enough.
So a lot of companies that we deal with is more than one. 2, 5, 10. And there are stories, they say, of companies with more than 100. So I'd like to introduce Barbara Lancaster real quick. Barbara Lancaster and I have known each other for at least 12 years, maybe 15 years.
Sure. Yeah.
And she is a fellow member of the senior billing practitioners and folks that in our industry that have, a little touch of wisdom theoretically. Welcome, Barbara, to Revenue Uncoded.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Indeed. It's great to have you here today, Barbara. So,
Thanks, Brian.
And Barbara's got an interesting past. She's been both a consultant, and she's also been a practitioner and at some very large North American telcos, and kind of come up from both customer service as well as billing domain, and a very well-rounded background. So welcome again, Barbara, for coming to
Thanks.
Revenue Uncoded. So this topic today of multiple billing systems. My thought is, most people that don't necessarily have a lot of experience in this domain are like, how the heck can anybody have more than one, right? So why don't we just talk about first, why
How'd you get there?
organizations? Yeah,
How
how'd
did
you
wind
get
up
there? How'd you
with
get there?
X plus number of billing systems.
Right.
So we've kind of touched on that a little bit before, and a lot of those items come in from mergers, acquisitions,
M&A, big
yes.
player.
legacy billing systems for products and services that were sold before. You're still selling them, but you haven't migrated off to another system. It's like, well, it's not broke. We're not going to change it because it's expensive
Right.
to do billing systems. And who else has got a thought on the wonderful world of multiple billing systems?
Well, mergers and acquisitions for sure, because they're funny things, often led by very senior management people in the company, and usually some IT people dragged along with them to take a good look under the covers at how things are working. But you can really get tripped up, even if the billing software application is the same name. Is it actually the same release, the same version, running
good
on
point.
the same
Good point. Or
servers?
or a vendor that might have like 18 different billing applications.
Well,
When they say,
exactly.
company X, there might be 18 different billing systems from them, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So even if you think in your due diligence that, oh yeah, this merger should go fairly smoothly because they're the same billing
Vendor,
app,
Yeah.
they're really not.
Yeah.
And even if they are identical in terms of release and maintenance, they've been configured differently.
Very true.
And not just with different product names, but different pricing plans, probably different taxation structures, maybe more tuned to enterprise customer contracts and terms and conditions, maybe more tuned to consumer. So they're never two the same.
This stuff is really simple when it's just a subscription or an MRC. But when you deal with all these other variables that you just said, you've got a vendor that has multiple billing systems. Each deployment is configured in a unique way so that it's kind of like an animal in and of itself, right? Or you've got business conditions that drive the advent of additional billing systems, right? So maybe Barbara, you could talk just briefly about what you've seen, why either a telco or an enterprise company has proliferated billing systems from, one core, 2 or 3 big, battleship engines to
Yeah.
5, 10, 15, or over 100. I want to talk about that, but maybe
You
talk to
will.
that first one first.
There are lots of good examples of more than 100. So a couple of things. One is that, and as you mentioned, Brian, if it's working, right, don't futz with it. There's no quicker way to strike terror into the heart of an executive than to say, I think we need to fix billing. They'll panic instantly. So if it is working, even if it's in a subset of the customer base and a subset of products and services, there's big reluctance to futzing with that. I think we can all remember headlines in the business journals of big errors where customers didn't get a bill for 6 months at a time, right? Not happy shareholders, not happy vendors, certainly not happy service provider. That's a horror story, right? No revenue for 6 months. So when somebody approaches the topic of, well, let's change something in billing, you get, really
Got
cautious.
claws on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, claws on the
Everybody's freaking
wall,
out.
really
Everybody's
carefully.
freaking out.
So over time, so in the beginning, let's go back to the 1950s when computers were really starting to be used in enterprise, especially in accounting systems. They just were billing straightforward. The world was, monopoly phone companies looking at that industry. So there were standard types of things for which the company was allowed to charge, and not much difference. Maybe a difference between residential and business tariffs, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Else was different, and usage was straightforward, either metered or bundled, local, long distance, straightforward. So the systems are up, they're running, they're just churning away. Billions of records every week, they're just churning away. Nobody wants to touch that. All of a sudden comes deregulation, competition. Now I can offer all kinds of things. Oh, but the billing system can't be changed cost effectively or maybe ever. So I go find a new one. And I get that one up and running, and it's doing the new business models and the new converged services and the new competitive services, and that's looking good. Then all of a sudden, customers stand up and they say, I want more billing detail. I want real-time access to how am I doing on towards my next discount tier or my next overage tier. Real-time access? Are you kidding? Where are we going to get that? Not from these billing systems. So go shopping again. And then comes another set of billing systems. And it actually doesn't take very long for a company of any size offering a diverse portfolio to get to 100 billing systems.
Wow.
Keep in mind that the product managers work in their own little silos too.
Did you see Did you see how she just went through 70 years in like 1.5 minutes? That was well played. That was very well done. It's very true. And it is very true. So a lot of these systems are still around. I mean,
yeah, and that's right. Once they're in, right?
And you decommission them, and there's platform, changes between mainframe to client server to XYZ, whatever's the flavor du jour of architecture.
How many COBOL systems do we convert people off of?
A lot. But
that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it.
No.
But now you see, a lot of it all has to tie back to how do you process and manage all this data? Because you brought up that really important point of when people wanted to see more detail and have an ongoing, instead of just getting the bill at the end of the month and go, oh, I'm 50 bucks away from my next discount or whatever the case may be. If you're doing that at the commercial level, selling that service, they have an entire telecom department that may be looking at this information. And if you're, especially in the city and government and county and that kind of things, they have a lot of vested interest in managing those telecom costs. And that's specifically before people started to kind of unplug the cord here. So that brings up a whole nother layer of information and challenges to these billing systems. But you remember the other thing we haven't added to this equation is the need to upgrade these systems over time because the infrastructure they're on has aged out. Whether it's
Oh, yeah.
operating system, whether it's hardware, whether it's a license, it's de-supported. The company that you bought it from is out of business, for example. So that's another layer that I think.
Or they've been sold and,
Yeah, we want to explore that because let's say their abacus
Yes.
no longer has the
M&A
wax
works
them
on
to
both
slide.
sides of the equation,
Yep.
both on the customer side and on the vendor side.
Without
Yeah,
a doubt.
that's such an important point you're bringing up, Brian. And the other, so corporations, we have started to talk about them as equal to people, a person, but that's not true. Maybe only in politics could it be true, but in real life, it's not true. And when you have a company that is made up of thousands of people, they have their own little fiefdoms. They belong to this department or that department, or they belong to this line of business. It's not one
Well-
big happy group of people.
All right, so that begets the question on my part, is that if you look and you're sitting down at 5, 10, 50, or 100 billing systems, you're on the board of directors and you're like, what the heck? How can this happen? Where are the economies of scales? How do we consolidate?
What's the risk involved with messing with these things? That's a huge
Well,
risk.
how hard can it be? They all do billing. Can't we just smush them all together?
It ain't rocket
but
science. This is just billing. Why is it so
No, and
difficult? I don't understand.
It's a classic train wreck ready to come and run you over if you don't do it right.
Yeah. So
And that's where one person doesn't get a bill for 6 months, but one customer gets all the bills every month. That doesn't go over well.
So my question is an enterprise or a telco that has numerous billing systems, is it really just an IT challenge, or is it a business challenge?
It's a business challenge. I mean, I don't see how it couldn't be a business challenge.
Because you don't want to kind of disrupt what's set it and forget it and don't forget about it.
Do you rip and replace? Do you do adjunct? Do you have how do you develop your plan? I guess that's probably the most important topic that comes out of these questions is what are those procedures you would use or the best practices to try and help if you had 35 billing systems, for example, and you want to go through the process of consolidation. Clearly, in my mind, the iterative approach is a little more pragmatic. You can't suddenly say, I'm going to do one project and wipe out all 35 at once.
Impossible.
You can't do it.
Impossible.
You might as well just jump off the cliff right now and scream all the way to
You're
the
just
ground.
cutting your revenue throat.
It's going to be a mess because
It'd
there's
be a bloodbath.
too many unknowns and too much synchronization between the systems, the revenue, and the accounting that all need to be taken into a play.
But you still need to have.
And
You
the
should.
people.
All right. So do you, as an either an IT executive or a CEO, right? When you're looking at these challenges, do you say, well, at least I need to consolidate from 13 down to 4, and maybe this one kind of deals with complex challenges. This one deals with industrial throughput that can kind of crank a gazillion through, like a big battleship, or, do I have these little one-offs and do I just kind of keep, the one resource that sits on top of on a server and just continues to spit it all out?
But look at
What's
what
the right,
we
what's
can
the right
do.
play? What's the right play?
Well, look at what we can do now with technology. I mean, things in the last 5 years, if we look at things like centralized data stores, and we look at common business functions, accessing and updating those data stores, all of a sudden you get a ton more flexibility, even with all those legacy hard-coded systems around the edges. You can create flexibility. And I think, that's something, Bill, that you and I and Brian, that we work on every day, is creating flexibility out of concrete. Yep. And man, is that fun because we can do it, right?
Yeah.
That changes the executive discussion, because instead of the non-expert view that just says, well, it's billing, that wasn't possible before, right? Because there were too many nuances, too many differences, too many
limitations,
too much infighting. The definition of customer our customer account was different in all of those billing systems. So that's what made it sound like a heck of an easy idea. And in reality, you're right, Brian, just drive right off that cliff right now. Now we can change that pattern because you know what? A customer can mean different things to different people and yet still be managed by one software routine. A bill can actually be a bill. And I say that because one of the companies that I worked with in Europe, one of the largest carriers in Europe, and they were approaching 1,000 billing systems.
No way. Are you serious? 1,000.
And
1,000 billing systems.
Yes. Everything from taxi dispatch billing systems to on out, right? Because they have more than 100 years worth of business to look after. How they got a dramatic change was they changed the way that every person looked at data. So instead of me saying, well, I can't move to your billing system because it uses green paper with blue stripes and my customers won't accept that. That was taken off the table. The question became, what do I need to calculate to put my charge on this bill? Mm-hmm. And that all of a sudden broke the dam because I couldn't stand on my high horse and put roadblocks up about things that didn't matter. What does matter? Revenue.
Exactly.
What does matter? Yeah. Customer satisfaction. What does matter, right, is offer flexibility. And when we move to abstract away from the nits and grits of the 1,000 billing systems, all of a sudden it became clear how much closer we could get. Now, I'm never going to get to one, never, because that's not practical either, right? You always want to be able to spin up.
Now, let's think about that for a second. Is it really unrealistic for a large Megatron carrier or a large Megatron enterprise customer not to get to one billing system?
I think it's a goal. I'm not sure it's easily achievable at 100% for economies of scale. You may have something that is there that I don't need. It works fine. I don't need to replace that right now. If I looked at my 1,000 scenario, I want to change the conversation calculus of what we can do with billing. It's not, don't tell me what we can't do. What do we want to do with this to meet our revenue goals and our customer satisfaction, right? Mm-hmm. That's my first thought. And the second part of that is, with 1,000, you're not going to do them all at once. That's just not going to happen. So you're going to take, what's my biggest bang for my buck on my first run at this and my next run at this, and bring the next one in. So to get to that final point where it's one instead of maybe three at the end, because there's two things that are out here that do very simplistic, straightforward things, but they're hooked to proprietary hardware, for example, or something. Mm-hmm. We can just take that, use it, be done with it. And yeah, we're actually going to bill it out of the main billing system, but it's got its own component that it computes part of this.
That's logical and it's correct. It's so counterintuitive to what I think a lot of people that are listening are going, are you serious?
Well,
that's insanity. But what do you think, Barb? Do you think the mega corps can get to one? Or is the juice worth the squeeze?
I think that's the question.
Get to one?
That's a question. And I tend to agree with you, Brian, that the goal is not one, but it may be less than 5, right? And so again, working with another very large carrier in North America, they set a goal to get down to 2. And they sort of stake in the ground. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of analysis to say how easy or how expensive or, where's the break even, just 2, enough. Everybody's got to make their product fit into one of these 2. Now, over a fairly short period of time, perhaps 18 months or so, the reality started to be more clear that no, it wasn't ever going to be 2, but it could be 5. And a lot of that was driven by customer base. So where your customers don't overlap the products and services, you can kind of keep those separate. and whether that's enterprise versus consumer, I guess, is the classic one. But there's different ways to slice and dice that. So where I don't have to have all of this consolidated onto an invoice for one customer, but where those customers each get the invoice that suits them, now it starts to get clear. Mm-hmm. And that's working, but that's a 10-year plan.
Wow.
Well, and I think it also goes down to that other piece of that consolidation of your data stores. How do you get that information into an accessible model to a distributed business that has multiple business entities and points of processing that need to be able to access this data? And how do you make sure that data is somewhat unified in its presentation to everyone, so everyone's looking at the same thing? How many times have we gone into an environment and there's someone looking at one report that the data came from one place regarding the billing. Another person says, no, look what I've got. And they're not looking at the same data. It's not even sourced from the same place. But the title on the report says the same thing. Today's revenue, for example. And you're like, oh, look, I've got it. It's like, well, you're only looking at this and you're only looking at that. The whole picture is more of a data amalgamation, that marrying of these different feeds together, which brings us to a technological piece that's now more readily available for everybody, which is being able to have these centralized or decentralized cloud storage and data access.
The data
positions.
stores that she was talking about originally, about a few minutes back.
But there's two pieces. One is access, security, and control, right? You can't give it to everybody, but you have views, and it's the classic data mart, data store, data reporting. But if you can virtualize that and get that data like in a cloud service, et cetera, you're able to make those changes in a more flexible manner to your hardware infrastructure. That's no longer the driving force when you make a change. You're talking about the data in and of itself and how you access it, who you give it to, or bringing in a new feed, a new view. The fact that you ran out of disk space, that's not an issue. You can add more anytime you want. Need more CPUs? You can buy more and just add it onto your system.
When I think about data stores, data views, I start thinking about the rate of success of data marts, data warehouses, enterprise data warehouses, and I don't know. Maybe I'm a little removed from it. Historically, those projects have not been successful.
And that's why, because you need to understand what each one of those little subsets are. Everybody's got their world. So like if you look at your more of your node-based processing today, web services, you've got functionality that's built into your system from your networking side to your service delivery to monitoring, all these different pieces. So traditionally you've had a data mart for each one of those. And then a bunch of people start cobbling together reports and
it
views
seems
of
like
that.
down here at the data mart level, it's reasonably consistent and it's very valid.
It's as soon as you
but
have
as
to
soon
bridge,
as you start adding more and more layers to it,
add three, and you've just got a disaster.
The accuracy kind of sequentially starts.
Sequencing, timing. I want a month-end report, but the data doesn't come in until 3 days after the end of the month. But I have an SLA to have it done in the first 24 hours. So, and all those different things come into play and are part of this 1,000 billing system pieces, because they're all interconnected and disconnected at the same time in a massive way.
Yeah, there you go.
This is complex. This is complex. I don't understand all this.
This is the truth. Disconnected and connected at the same time. I love that, Brian. So we have, if we continue to look at things as one big lump, it's how do I climb Mount Everest? How do I, we have to take it apart. And we have to take it apart into logical pieces that everybody can understand. And probably the first logical piece, hardest, the people. Why do you want...
Hold on. When you say people, do you mean internal people or do you mean...
Internal people.
Okay. All right. Keep going. Sorry I interrupted you. Keep going.
No. Great clarification, because it's back to that report. Like, so why do I need my report to look exactly like this? And will my world actually break if it's not like that? And these are just changes, and people are notoriously not really great at accepting change. But But we now, again, come back to we have the technology to slice and dice things differently. And here's again where a new definition of adjunct comes back into play. I can live in my little world and everything is tuned to me and it's working just fine. And I don't even need to be aware that it's actually logically integrated
Right.
to the big machine.
All right, so you've introduced this word adjunct, right? And I'm not sure that everybody really understands what we mean when we say adjunct. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to describe by what we mean by adjunct.
Okay, well, I mean, so I'm going to say classically to the side, right? It is to the side of something else. And so typically it's adjunct to a bigger thing. Warts on elephants. But,
right.
right? So that's really what we're saying. So when we typically look to adjunct is a much nicer word than workaround, but the catalyst is the same. And I think workarounds imply messy, expensive, temporary, not easily able to be controlled, messy. Adjunct implies another layer of sophistication, designed, controlled, planned.
And we're talking adjunct billing. Whether
Right.
that's a rating function, whether that's a product catalog, whether that's whatever, right?
It can live in the ecosystem
it's-
with their existing system. You can do the one challenge that everybody has when you have a lot of legacy ones, legacy systems and processes, which is they may have been set up years or decades ago in some instances. So when you take an adjunct, you're able to do that migration path without breaking what's working today, dropping your risk considerably, move that over. You get to go left to right. Where did this one come from on the legacy system and how was it generated? And I may look at it and go, I don't even want to decouple all the things that are in it, but I know it starts here and it ends here. Can I just do this in a more simple way and move it to my adjunct system and retire that whole piece of infrastructure and move it to my adjunct system? So to me, that's an option for doing that. And then I think we have another scenario with that, which is I've got a system that does 80% of what I want for a particular billing environment or process that we're going to do. But it can't do complex commissioning or something, for example.
Multi-party settlement, whatever.
Yeah, so it's got 80% of it. Can I just keep that and then feed that right into the adjunct system and have it take it the last 20% over the finish line? And that's a great interim piece to put in place that allows you to safely and over time understand the processes you have in place and migrate it off of the old system to a new one that's more easy to
So
maintain.
in effect, if you go down that path, you're not necessarily introducing an entire new billing system with all of the different hooks and claws and pieces and integration points, but really just kind of a finishing or some element of French pastry that is required to meet the business requirement that we can't do X.
Right.
So let me just grab a piece of it, put it out here to the side, right, and then have it kind of work in concert with everything else that I've got, instead of introducing a number 101
Right, and
into
so
the
the
equation.
goal is, how do I minimize risk as we bring on these new processes to take over the old ones? And you may not want to do it right on the first piece, and you actually are technically going to go to 101 for a little bit. But 101 is going to give you a safe, pro forma-based system to replicate and then decommission the old ones, minimizing your exposure. Because if you can't figure out how you're gonna do it going forward, well, you've got bigger problems than just 101. You need to be able to understand left to right. What are the feeds that I have that are going in that are gonna wind up being a revenue feed on a bill? Where does it need to go? Who's got it? Do I have everything covered today in the old system? I may not know it. It may be cheaper to go, you know what? I need something that looks like this. So how do I do that and generate it with this system and these pieces of information? Let me do this in parallel so we can design that one and bring it and come out and then go, yep, we've hit it. Now we understand how it works, and we can retire the legacy one that was built by something strange years ago that it's not supported anymore.
It's no longer required.
Yeah.
Absolutely true, Brian. And the other thing it gives us is a chance to test out our idea, right? Without
The infamous fail
interfering.
fast. The infamous fail
Yeah.
fast argument, right?
Yeah, try it out, and maybe the customer take on our new product or service idea is going to wildly exceed our expectations, and we're going to have to figure out how to scale much quicker than we expected.
Yeah.
Or
And
maybe it doesn't sell as fast as we want. We have to rethink our whole revenue model.
And that's a different,
You know?
it's a different model for that channel of adjunct billing. That's new services and offerings. Fail fast, be able to do that. Then the flip
Yep.
side of it is conversion models. How can I do
Yes.
this in a more efficient and safe manner as opposed to, brain surgery, ripping the top off of it, plugging in a new brain and hoping everything works. So
Yep.
two very distinct but very important ways to utilize that technology with an adjunct billing system to allow you to do these things quickly. So in today's world with your kind of configuration-driven systems that aren't so reliant on 100 man-hours per change of code to whatever, you're talking about configurations. You're able to kind of design it in a left to right process that says, I'm going to configure it this way. I can apply these processes into that are tasks that are already functional. I don't have to code them. I know how to load data. I know how to put it in a database. I know how to write a report. All those kind of things. Those engines are already set up there to do that. So I just have to put the dressing around it with the configuration pieces. That makes that process a lot less costly, more easily managed, and a lot shorter time frame to deliver stuff.
Very good.
Which that's
We're
been my
talking-
experience.
At its foundation, everything that we're talking about is flexibility, right? Is agility.
And agility.
Agility. And things, I mean, these things were not possible 30 years ago, but they are possible now. And one of the problems that large corporations have is that they have often hugely expert IT teams in the way things are. They don't have the time or the budgets to go exploring into the what could be. So I often find talking to, people who are inarguably experts in IT architecture and making things work, but I bring up a
Technical debt?
new cloud approach or a new technology, and they give you a blank stare. They've not heard that before. They've not seen it before. They've not been able to go to a conference and kick around ideas, especially with COVID. So they're kind of not in a backwater, but they're not in a place where they're even paid to think of the future and analyze the future and find the future. Now, a lot of large companies actually have departments that are called, future technology. And now you've got a small group of people who are tasked with knowing everything about every possibility. But they then become a silo and they can't share what they've learned with the people keeping the machines running today. So I think that the gap of thinking about conversion, migration, horror stories, that lives large in everybody's mind that's been around for a while. We have to find a way to say, stop that. It's not like that anymore. It's like what you described, Brian. You have choices. We can use adjunct processes as little highly efficient and functional workarounds until we figure out what the better solution is. And we make every incremental decision and we make them fast because we don't have to wait for next year or next budget cycle because it's configuration. But so how do we get that message out to the thousands and thousands of brilliant people out there who could just take this and run?
Good question. So
I think a hot air balloon.
those are wonderful.
Okay, that's my old. I
That's
like
right.
that.
You've used a lot of left to right today, Brian.
I do,
It's
and
almost
that's a
as,
favorite of
It's
mine.
almost as if you come from a background that we're,
I may have
destination,
crunched a few bits
where
and
the
bytes.
creation and how it kind of goes through a whole process and how it's filtered and massaged.
So it's important to be able to understand, from our mediation and reporting practices over the years, a common thread always appears.
Mediation is we're talking about like people where they're not getting along and they need mediator.
Yes, they do need mediators, and it starts with their data. Then they don't get along on how their report looks.
It's just that
They
that
don't
word
understand
mediation
it.
is, had an interesting life cycle over our tenure, right? You know, and some people believe that it's kind of become, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of commodity-ish. I would disagree wholeheartedly, right?
I would say if you don't understand where your data came from, how you processed it, and where you put it, you're blind.
Boom. And all of the, and all those examples that you were talking about before with, a report that comes out 3 days later, that you're missing SLAs and all those sorts of things, that's born from 20 plus years of having to
answer questions.
answer
from
those
people.
fire questions.
Why,
Like, what the heck's
why
up
does my
with this?
report look so crazy? I said, well, because you don't have all your data in yet.
Right.
Yes, we do. It's supposed to come out on the second day after the end of the month. Your billing doesn't end for 2 more days.
Right. Or the data source has got a rounding error for the 10th of a second that translates into XYZ. All right, well, let's don't go there. All right, so let's get
gives me a bitter
back to
face.
multiple billing systems and the challenges for customers. So I think, I think people that are, that are going to get excerpts or listen to this podcast, I think the overwhelming majority typically have one billing system, right? I mean, if you're a small to medium-sized organization, you'll have one, maybe two. But as you kind of continue to go up the scale, or if you come with an M&A background, or you've got, you're not a greenfield and you've got a 20 to 40 year history, there are going to be pockets, whether they're feeds or billing systems or billing processes that are disparate. They're going to have multiple ones, and I don't know if we've come to a, there's one size that fits all answer here, right? But it does kind of sound like, from an IT system perspective, you want to drive toward consolidation. You want to take the argument that Barbara's suggested from real world experiences at some of the largest telco operators in North America and Europe that say, pick a certain number, right? And whether that grouping evolves around, complex issues or customer view issues, it's really interesting, right? So, is that what we're saying? Is that, nobody's going to allow an IT budget over 10 years to be the same that says, well, we've got these 100 billing systems. How do we consolidate the costs? How do we drive economies of scale, right?
Yeah.
But I think you've also
No, it'll be
said,
bigger.
yeah, but I think the other thing here is that, there's no magic wand,
No.
right? That just says, well, we're going to take these 15 billing systems and, maybe they're orphan system over here and orphan system over there, and we don't have an understanding about the data that is in this billing
And
system.
that's part of that order of magnitude.
And
you
we
need
do
to
have a
determine.
customer that has that exact problem, right? Where there's M&A and it's a billing system that sits out there by itself, and the guy that knew about the code or the processes is gone, either he passed away or
Gone, okay,
he's
He didn't survive
or
the
he
acquisition.
didn't revive the acquisition. So now you're sitting there going, what am I going to do with this?
And
right?
that goes into that discovery phase where you
And-
walk in and go, where's the juice and the squeeze out of this? What's the best approach to minimize the cost and the heartache of taking control of a system that you may not quite understand?
Correct.
So that process, that adjunct thing is a great way to be able to make quick headway on
Correct.
that. Even
I
if
would
you
agree.
just use it as a diagnostic tool to figure out on a
Yes.
very
that.
complex system. Because one of the neat things about a flexible configuration-based approach as an adjunct is you're able to ingest those data stores and the materials that are consumed by the current billing system in parallel. Go ahead and then you can play with it and figure out, well, what is it really doing here? How did it wind up coming out here? And, you don't have to go back and reinvent all the code that's in there.
You can reduce the reverse engineering life cycle.
By a massive amount. Because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, once you kind of get your feet around this, every one of these things is driven more by data than it is by code. So it's about the data, how you manage it, the timing.
Well, I mean, that's
the
been a common
processing.
theme throughout this discussion, right?
Well, it isn't
Barb's
billing.
mentioned it. You've mentioned it. So
What billing
is
system
it all
doesn't
just
use
about a data view, a customer information data view? Is that really the right approach?
It's one on the if you're billing usage or any sort of event management, you've got a lot of transactions that you need to manage. Turn that into a bill, make that into your revenue, make sure that you're making money on it. You need to understand what those transactions are, how you get them. Are you billing megabytes and megabits and data? Are you doing streaming? Are you doing per text? Are you doing there's the models have always been based on some sort of consumption or use of something. I'm selling something at a price over time, and that's data.
Yep.
Yep. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and one of the other things I would probably advocate is that if you have diverse billing requirements, if you've got multiple billing systems, right, and if you don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the future with either XYZ acquisition or, LMN new product offering that's going to come out of some offshoot, one of your at least core systems, right, needs to be able to kind of do as much as possible across that spectrum.
Flexible and future-proofed is kind of what I like to think of with that. So that as you use that model with that engine that's able to consume other things and you can get in and
Whether it's a usage or a hot dog.
Yeah, or
it
Hot
doesn't
Wheel
matter.
cars, flea market, whatever the case it is. There's some sort of set of transactions or things that are being done. You want to be able to utilize a technology that will stay flexible and relevant for you as these environments change, as those markets change.
Correct. And one of the quick sidebars on that is that, a telecom billing system, right? Whether it's rate code based or whatever, or feature code based, it tends to kind of come from that space, right? And its ability to do other things
Quickly.
right? Is not necessarily, you're kind of square peg in a round hole.
That's
right?
traditionally, that has certainly been the case.
And that is, and I don't know, who knows where telecom's going to go? Who knows where a company's going to evolve or migrate to? But if we're talking about multiple billing systems, I think one piece of advice is, one of them better be able to kind of deal with multiple wherever you go.
It needs to be nimble because the market's going to change. I mean, just look at pre-COVID versus post-COVID, the consumption of people's digital services. People are shuttering offices. They're buying more bandwidth than pipe, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an opportunity for you as a pipe provider?
Mm-hmm.
So here comes the next view of adjunct, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you consider that let's say you stick with the good old 80-20, Mr. Pareto's still right, that your core infrastructure can do a pretty good job on that 80%, but what you lack is the speed to react to opportunities, that 20% new revenue, 20% new customers. And if we think of adjunct instead of on the side as maybe adjunct over the top, so that all the message sets and transactions and requests for service are coming in first to the adjunct engine and then being instantly parsed. And stuff that legacy can handle, away it goes. Stuff that needs special processing, yep, we keep it over here in adjunct and finish it there. We now have, I guess it's sort of like what was conceived as an enterprise service bus, but on steroids. Right? Because we can do that now. In real time, we can take every single one of those transactions and figure out what has to happen to it and make it happen. Yep. And so It's another way to break up the concrete and get that flexibility, get that agility.
Giddy up. I like it.
So if we hit our top 5 items for moving forward with an adjunct or more flexible billing process to minimize the 1,000 down to a more manageable number.
Half a dozen for a big-sized company.
So-
maybe two or three for a mid-sized company. I think a small company is going to stick with one, right?
So
They're going to
if,
try.
if you listed your top, let's just say your top 3 things that you think are helpful for anyone to look at when if they're suffering from these challenges.
What do you do?
What-
Where do you go?
What are the first few things you want to get your head around and your hands on, information-wise, to help drive you to a good solution path?
Well, you two are the practitioners, so I'm going to.
That's why we're going to ask you.
No, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to defer that one to Barbara. Where do you start, Barbara?
Well, I think you got to start with the data. The data is, as you were saying earlier, Brian, the data is what drives your business, really. So, but by studying what information does your company need, you start to decouple the egos and the little fiefdoms, because we're not going to talk about mobile services or construction services no, we're just going to talk about what are the details of products and services? How do we charge for them? Where does the money come from, go to? We start to talk about something that is almost that little tiny bit at arm's length. And once we understand the data the company needs, we can then decide on how it gets there. As you said, where's it come from? What are the processes that create it? And start, back out, re-engineer from the core, because it's now possible for the data stores to be common and accessible from anywhere with the right permissions and all of those things, as you said. But it's the data that we need to make sure retains its integrity. And all the rest of it, all the processes and forms and people and AI chatbots, all that still needs to be sure that they're dealing with accurate data.
Yep.
All right. How about you? Would you add anything more to that, Brian?
Well, she stole mine because it's that data, and Barbara, you're just off the Christmas list now.
So in this instance, data is king, not instead of pipe is king.
Well, but you got to have the pipe to get the data.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
so
Pipe
we're
is
gonna go
always
ahead.
king. All right.
That's an infrastructure piece, and you can add more pipe. There's big build outs, et cetera.
Telcom.
So telecom side on
Yes.
this, if you're looking at your items, your ability to use that data, you want to also understand what other associated data do I need to mesh with my event data or transaction data, for example, to make it viable and usable in my billing environment to manage my revenue. That can be nasty things like tax codes. It can be in telecom, what ladder is it in this state, not in that state. A lot of that data, some of that data is reference data that needs to be added to it. And you'll find all of that buried in those systems that they've manipulated that data as it came in to get it to come out on that one little billing record. So when you're able to take those data stores into that flexible environment, adjunct-wise, I'm a big proponent of that because it allows me to track from left to right what came in. And if I know it needs to come out with this on it, and it's not on the data, I know I'm missing something. I've got to be able to go out and find those items. So I don't necessarily even have to completely decode everything within the old code architecture from that. You can look at that process and usually kind of follow the dots on the data because those are the events that are going to wind up on your bill. That's not necessarily practical all the time, but it gives you a great place to start because some of the hardest parts are answering the first question. Where do we start?
Where do we start? Now, you said another really important thing, so I'll steal it before you recognize you said that.
What?
And that's outcomes. I would say the number 2 of the top 3, Bill, people have to shift to always focusing on outcomes, not activity. Who cares, right? where do we want to go? What's it going to look like when we're done? What are we going to be able to do that we can't do today? Focusing on the outcome of why do we want to do this. So if we can stay focused on the outcomes, again, we don't get stuck in the mud of the little mice on the wheel.
Yep.
We're focused on the outcomes. And that's essential. When we give progress reports on projects to the leadership team, and people want to talk about on time, on budget, on scope, oh, bananas. Have you never noticed that their eyes glaze over? They don't care. They want to know, are we getting to where we said we were going to go? So give me your project update in terms of progress to the outcome, and now I'll pay attention, right?
Yeah.
So
Or-
it's
the other side of that is if it turns out that the outcome described that was initially thought to be the outcome desired turns out to be, oops, that's not going to get us where we need to go. So you need to be able to pivot quickly
Yes.
and make those adjustments to your outcome. But sorry I interrupted you because you're
No,
on a
no,
roll.
you're exactly right. You're 100% right, Brian, because when we track budget, scope, time, we get lost in the fact that we are wavering off course. And, now we're 3 degrees off, we're 10 degrees off, we're 50 degrees off to where we want to go. You can't do that if you stay focused on progress to outcome. And you're right. So you'll realize much more quickly, everyone will realize that we're not going the way we wanted to go. And if the faster we realize that, the less money we waste, the more money we have to spend on getting back on track. So that's important. And that kind of leads me to my third big thing, which is vision. If
yes.
everybody knows what their own role is and how
Boom.
that plays into achieving the outcome,
Boom.
then we're pretty good at it. But if we're not sure how our contribution makes an impact,
It's so simplistic. It sounds so simplistic, but for whatever reason, doing this as long as I have with this white hair, you're absolutely right. Is that if everybody understands the vision and their role in accomplishing the vision, right? Things kind of, everybody's rowing at the same, in the same sequence and cadence. But for whatever reason, it always gets off track. It always gets off track, right? So that's a function of leadership, and that's a function of
Well, and it's a
lot of
vision
different
into
variables.
how
But
to determine the outcome
Yeah.
that you're working for. We may all have an idea of where we want to be, but how you get there, that conveyor belt to success of each one of those steps on a system that you don't quite understand, that you're going to replace, for example, in the scenarios we've been discussing here, you have to have that ability to change who's pushing what or at what speed at a given time to keep it on track. Because it may turn out that you were actually paddling yourself over towards the waterfall to go off the edge. and you don't even see it. And it seemed like a sensible thing to be going for to start with.
Yep.
But as you walk through that process, it's that iterative approach that means you need to be able to pivot fairly quickly, fail fast on the development side here, as you pull that information in to get to that desired outcome. Because all the other steps are simply rungs in that ladder to get you to the outcome. And so if it turns out you got a couple of steps that are taking you off the cliff, just get rid of those. They're not helping you. And so that's that goal.
So if I, if we kind of look at things here, right? So you're obviously, you two are big data bigots, right? Let's look at the data
No, they're
first,
data
right?
spigots.
Let's go. All right. So good. Data spigots is better.
Thank
I
you.
like that.
Thank you very much.
So go for the data, number one, right? Work toward, some logical number of systems that makes sense.
Outcomes, I think, and
number
the
three,
systems will
number
fall in
three
line.
is consider something that can be a traffic cop, right? That can kind of work on top and kind of route, what is the need of the business, right? And do we need to kind of route it to the legacy systems that can handle it just fine, or do we have a business incremental change that requires us to kind of do something different or unique and consider something that can kind of live in an adjunct capacity and then filter back. So I think that's what I kind of hear in terms of.
I would agree. What I think we've surfaced here in another one is another complete topic of how do you manage towards this if you're running these projects? Because there's a lot of stuff that comes in. I don't think that's a subject for this particular podcast.
Probably not, but
it's so involved. I got
the
a
one thing
million
is
things
the
to think about
realization that there is no magic wand.
Nope.
You are not going to consolidate, 3, 5, 50 systems, in a year, right, or 2 years. It is pragmatically a multi-year approach, right? Or you just say, damn the torpedoes. You know what? We're going to get all of these 20 systems. We're going to get them across, and we're going to cut them across a consolidation effort, and we're willing to have collateral damage.
And that's
So now that's
the
just a
risk.
business
That's a risk
decision,
factor. What you
right?
risk
That's just a
all
business
risk.
decision.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've sat with venture capital companies.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And they don't care. Right? When they're looking at private equity firms, when they're saying, we understand that we're going to blend together these 5 entities, right? But we are going to get to one billing system, and it is going to take us 18 months. And I'm willing to kind of deal with
the
some
bumps are
collateral
gonna be the
damage.
bumps. Yep.
And you just look at him and go, wow, okay, fair enough. If
And
you're
it's
willing
not
to do
smooth
that,
and pretty, but it will get there.
yeah, so.
That's a risk reward
Yeah,
scenario
without a doubt.
there.
Without a doubt. So, anyway,
You're absolutely right.
so have we kind of wrapped it up? What do you think, Barb? You got anything else you want to throw in?
Final thoughts. Let's go final thoughts here, Barb.
Final thoughts. Well, your way out of 100 plus billing systems is to find a way to create flexibility and agility. I think we've said that now in many different ways, but that's the reason you have 100 is because you don't have flexibility and agility. And the way that you're moving is just to add another one, add another one, add another one, but you're not solving the problem. So solving the problem means stepping back and looking for the thing that's going to break up your concrete and allow you to move forward wherever your business wants you to go.
And I would kind of say that there's a Einstein relativity here, right? Whether it's 3 or 100, right? It's all relative, right? So to deal with
Yes.
the same business challenges. Mr. Preston, what else do you have?
Well, I will, since Barb stole all of my thunder, I'm going to echo that, and I completely agree with that. And the other one is, as you are thinking about that process of how you approach skinnying this number down, how do we get to that position from 20 to 7 to 3? Each one of those exercises needs to be reviewed from its start point to where you want it to wind up. And then how you approach that, make sure you've got the right technology and the flexibility to do that. So you don't have somebody with a stake stuck in the ground that says, well, you can do everything you want, but you have to do this exact way each time. Or no, you've got to be able to be flexible to ebb and flow with these different existing tasks to get to the outcome that you want. That's the in my mind, some of the secret sauce of managing those projects to a little better conclusion, because it's difficult if there's something that people don't want to change and they think it can't be changed. Step back, look at that data, look at that process, and see where it winds up.
Data, left to right.
Total data and
There you go.
process.
All
And
right.
processing left to right.
All right.
Barb may have said that too.
Well, I don't know, but anyway, I'd just like to thank Barbara for jumping in today on Revenue Uncoded and providing some sage wisdom from
Well, thank you,
experience
gentlemen.
gained.
It has been a pleasure, as always, talking with you two.
Always.
Thanks, Barb.
Brian, I think that's a wrap for
That's
another
the wrap.
episode of Revenue Uncoded. Coded.
We're going to have to figure out how to put that echo in there, right? Technical problem, data in, data out with an echo.
All right.
Thanks again, Barb.
Thanks again, Barb.
Thanks,
Take care.
guys.
Cheers.
It's been a blast. Have a wonderful weekend.
All right, back to you.
Thanks.